By thinking can we arrive at understanding. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. There are many places in the Gospels where we see Jesus in open conflict with the Pharisees, that is to say, with man-made as opposed to true mystical tradition. In the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 15, we see a good example of how they and he locked horns. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees from Jerusalem came and asked Jesus, "Why do your disciples break our ancient tradition and eat their food without washing their hands properly first?" Jesus, after scolding them for their hypocrisy in observing lesser rules so carefully while ignoring the much more important ones, said, "Listen and understand this thoroughly. It is not what goes into a man's mouth that makes him common or unclean. It is what comes out of a man's mouth that makes him unclean." Did I read that right? It is what comes out of a man's mouth that makes him unclean. It wasn't that Jesus counseled against such wholesome practices as washing one's hands before eating. In an age, however, when lesser rules were given too much importance relative to the truly important observances, cleansing the heart of impure desires, for example. He emphasized the supreme importance of loving God and of communing with Him. The Pharisees, the orthodox religionists of his day, in other words, had brought true religion down to a level of intellectual hair-splitting. They mistakenly considered the way to understanding to lie through a minefield of definitions, which they tried to refine to ultimate exactitude. Jesus taught, however, that the intellect alone can never lead one to truth. Without love, indeed, there is no ultimate verity. Without fixity of purpose, born of the heart's devotion, the intellect wanders endlessly. It cannot settle for long on anything. As the Bhagavad Gita says in the 2nd chapter, the intellects of those who lack fixity of spiritual purpose are inconstant, their interests endlessly ramified. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dharmaraj, and my wife Dharmini is not well today, but she's on the mend, and so she's been feeling all your prayers and good wishes, so thank you. We have one of the eternal questions today. By thinking, can we arrive at understanding? The balance between thinking and feeling. And before launching into the subject, I wanted to share a few things. Jesus says later in the Bible that God does not reveal himself unto the prudent and the wise, but unto babes. And in that spirit, I thought I would read from Whispers from Eternity. One of the, he has a whole section on prayer demands for children. And so this one is, "Come to me as peace in sleep, and as joy when I am awake. Dear Heavenly Father, when I'm asleep, come to me as peace. When I am awake, come to me as joy. When I give kindness to others, come to me as love. When I run, run with high energy through my legs. When I think, send understanding through my thoughts. When I use willpower, send your willpower through me. Teach me to think, play, behave, and use my will rightly, for thou art always by me. I love to be guided by thee, for thou, more even than my parents, dost always wish the best for me. It's very sweet. Another thing I would like to share before launching into it is a brief excerpt of Yogananda speaking on this topic of contrasting reason with feeling, reason with intuition. There was an American and an Indian who were assigned to write an article about elephants. And so the American researched through Google all that there is to know about elephants, went on YouTube and watched videos of elephants being born and watched them, walking through the water and so on, and went on Facebook and said, hey, I'm writing an article on elephants. Does anybody have any ideas? And came up with an article on elephants. The Indian went out, found an elephant, meditated, became one with the elephant, and then wrote the article from that direct experience. Now, we have to talk about, actually that reminds me of a completely unrelated joke. What did the yogi say to the hot dog salesman or the hot dog vendor? Probably heard this one. Make me one with everything. Okay. It isn't the case that thinking is right and intuition, thinking is wrong and intuition is right. That is going to be part of the emphasis of my talk today. But it isn't that we should never think, obviously. I mean, thinking is extremely helpful, and I'll go into it more. But it's a question of emphasis, as Yogananda was saying in the talk. In the West, we tend to come more from a place of logic, of thinking, of analysis. And in the East, it comes more from a place of intuition. Now, this isn't just between East and West, it's also the masculine and feminine natures. I don't say male and female because some females can be very masculine and males can be feminine and so on. Ultimately, we want to balance both in our hearts. But the masculine nature is more reason and logic, and the feminine nature is more feeling, intuition, perception that way. Now, there was an ad campaign by Apple many years ago when they were advertising their computers, and it said, "Think different." And they had these beautiful pictures. They had Mother Teresa, they had Gandhi, Martin Luther King, these heroes of our history in America, well, worldwide. And it said, "Think different," Marie Curie, and so on. And so it was a really inspirational ad campaign. And at that time, someone was joking that we should put Yogananda up there too, and it could say think different. And someone said, no, it could just be Yogananda and say think, period. Obviously, we need to reflect on our lives. That's how we arrive at any kind of understanding. We need to think. Thinking is necessary, absolutely, to see. For example, if I keep hitting the same wall over and over and over again, well, maybe it has less to do with the wall and the fact that I keep running at it at full speed. And so what is it in me that keeps kind of going after this? We need to have that self-reflection. It can be a very useful tool. And it is true that if we analyze ourselves or analyze a situation, we can sometimes find a new insight that is liberating. The challenge is that reason itself, logic itself, is limited. I had a degree in mathematics and computer science, and so I kind of focused on thinking and logic. And you will see a lot of people just kind of swear by, is it logical? Is it scientific? Is it proven? Now, saying that with a desire to say, is it true, is very laudable. Of course, that's the ultimate question. Is it true? We care about what is true. In fact, devotion itself, we talk so much about devotion and how important devotion is. And what is devotion? I was thinking, how can you explain devotion to someone who doesn't know it or is curious? Or, well, I don't see why you would have devotion. What's the point? I met someone like that recently, and I was trying to think, it's been so long since I've thought that way. How could I kind of make it just even a definition of devotion, and we had one here in the book. Devotion is longing. When we long for God, that's it. That's why we do all the things that we do, when we long to know the truth, when we care. Because if we don't long or don't care, then fine, then continue on. But when we do long, that's what fuels our spiritual search. That's what makes us get up at 5:30 in the morning and kind of, and sit for meditation. That's what makes us say, if there's something wrong in me, I want to correct it because I don't want to waste any more time. And that longing that we each have is a gift. It's a gift hard won by your experiences in this life and in past lives. To be able to have that longing, it's your greatest treasure, because every desire must be fulfilled. And once you have the desire for God, that too, Yogananda said, must be fulfilled. So now we are in the 11th hour, or we're at 11, if everyone's going to be self-realized at midnight, then it's 11:59 on the clock. We are that close. It's important to remember that. Now, in terms of the limits of thinking, however, even mathematicians, in terms of, I was saying, is it proven? Is it scientific? Okay, is it true? Great. Otherwise, people will say, well, has it been documented? What universities have echoed your sentiments? I was at Petco the other day, and I think I told this story, and I'll tell it again. And this guy was saying to a dog trainer there, well, I give my dog these rawhide chips, and it says that rawhide chips have been proven to increase the dog's, tartar, destruction or something. And he said, it's a Harvard study. And the woman said, the trainer said, well, I don't believe that. And he said, you don't believe Harvard? And she kind of folded in a little bit and said, well, and I just thought, that's just the core of it. You don't believe Harvard. It's like, well, I went to MIT, and so therefore I say that the chips are bad for the dog. But she couldn't say, she started to, but she couldn't quite say, I believe my own experience. I've given this to dogs, and it's hurt their gums, and she could just say, I've seen it. What are you going to say to that? Nothing. And so the same thing for us. We should seek not only what Harvard says, but also what we ourselves have experienced, because no one can argue with that, including ourselves. When we get afflicted with self-doubt, we can say, you know what, I remember it was this way, I experienced it, and I cling to that despite my present confusion. The thing that's so ironic is touting mathematics and science as the ultimate in this is how you arrive at truth through reason, when they themselves say reason is limited, logic is limited. For example, in logic, in Euclidean geometry, we have all these theorems that we prove based on postulates, and these postulates and axioms are what we start with. And how do we know if they are true? We don't. And they freely admit that. We don't. Let's just say that two parallel lines never meet, because it seems kind of that way. Highland doesn't suddenly crash into La Brea. Actually, it does. Well, and see, that's the point. That's what Master was saying of Sri Yukteswar, that we are hypnotized by our environment and we can't see past the horizon of our own experience. We say parallel lines never meet, and at Edgewood they do. And if you look at a sphere and you see like the latitude lines on the globe, you see that at the edges they look like they curve and they meet. And that's just a ball. I mean, that's such an easy thing to disprove this axiom. So logic itself has to start with a true premise. And from that true premise, it can arrive at other true statements. But it doesn't know if the first premise was true. And similarly, there was a man at the turn of the century in the 1900s who was named Hamilton, I think. Gosh, my math is getting rusty now, my math history. And he had, Hamilton, and he had he had 10 problems that he said, these are the problems that will define the next century of mathematics. And if we can just settle some of these, we will, really take mathematics forward. And one of them, and one of the ones that he was most prizing, was to prove that mathematics is logically consistent. To come up with a system of logic that can describe mathematical proof and then prove that everything works as it should, which is pretty much what everybody thinks it does. He knew enough to say, let's prove that it does. And he said, because then you can come up with a computer that can start proving things for you and all these things. And one of his students, can't quite remember his name either. Jeez, it's been a while. One of his students, Kurt Gödel, proved that you could never prove that this was true. He didn't even prove that it was false. He proved that you couldn't even prove whether it was true or false. Talk about inconsistent. And Hamilton was heartbroken. I have this feeling his name isn't Hamilton now that I'm saying this with such confidence, but there you have it, see? So don't believe everything you hear, don't believe everything you think also. But in this case, mathematics itself is given to be inconsistent. Furthermore, truth is not arrived at in science by by logic. Einstein didn't kind of figure it out, that E equals mc squared. He saw it in a flash of intuition. There's a discussion with Richard Feynman, who's another great physicist, who was trying to solve some equation, and he was staring at it, and he worked all these things, and finally he said, I just felt very calm, and I just looked at the equation, and I just kind of tapped it, and it just fell apart. And he said, I remember everything about that moment. I remember the smell. I remember the feeling. I remember the feeling of the paper on my hand, the pencil. I remember every element as if it's today. That's a superconscious experience. That's an experience of intuition. Whenever we have a flash of intuition and when we recall it, it's crystal clear. Now, just as it was at the time, we can be sure that there was superconsciousness in it. So, it's silly to depend only on thinking when even the masters of logic themselves say, can't depend on logic. It takes us a certain distance, but it doesn't take us far enough. Now, this is helpful too, not just in understanding mathematics, which of course I enjoyed doing, but I'm probably alone in that, in this room. No, maybe some of you did. Maybe? No, okay. But what about understanding the situations, understanding our lives, understanding other people? We find that when we try to analyze someone, to try to figure them out, that very often we completely miss the point. In the Native Americans have that phrase, don't try to understand someone till you have walked a mile in his moccasins. I remember once one of the first, it was the first lecture perhaps that I'd ever attended on Yogananda's teachings, if I'm not mistaken, in Boston. I had already read the autobiography of a yogi, was already connected with Ananda, but this was the first lecture, or among the first. And this person was the person presenting, Prem Shanti and Larry, for those of you who know them, were talking about the parallels between Yogananda's teachings and Christ, and even talked about how Yogananda called his work the second coming of Christ. And the woman next to me just started going like this, and they were saying that this really was the true Christianity, and she started to bend over like this, and she kept herself bent for a long time. And I said, poor woman. She's feeling that conflict instilled by her pastor or her priest, telling her to disbelieve the false teachings and false prophets. And I started praying, Master Jesus, help her to see there is no conflict. This is the same essential truth. And then after a time, she sat back up, and the lecture was over, and one of her friends turned to her and said, how's your back pain? She said, oh, it was horrible. I just can't, it really distracted me, but I feel better now, thanks. And then later in conversation, she told me that she had read Autobiography of a Yogi when she was 18 and took Kriya initiation and has been on this path forever. So how do we know anything, really? But on the other hand, people approach us expecting to be analyzed. We expect to be analyzed. Well, I don't know what they'll think of me. And I recently, a friend was telling me about, she's a personal trainer. And so she brings people, people come often with injuries that, and sometimes young people with injuries. And she was telling me about a particular friend who came, well, wasn't a friend at the time, 26 years old, back pain. And you can imagine, back pain maybe when you're 70 is what you think when you're 26. But the person has back pain now, and it's scary. I mean, the back is the core of, what we're doing and the living in our bodies, and we never even think about the back. We can't even really see it. And yet, if there's a problem, the show is stopped for now. And so this girl was a terror. She was nasty to the people who greeted her at the door. She was nasty to the person who was checking her in. She was nasty to everybody. And then she was nasty to my friend too. Because my friend said, well, I think one of the challenges you're facing is your posture. And so let's practice just sitting right here. And she said, you know what? This is totally boring. And I'm not going to do any of this. I want to go work on that machine. And my friend said, okay. And the girl said, what? And she said, okay. I mean, I can understand when I was your age, I'd probably be just as bored with this exercise. Let's go work on the machine. She said, well, that was easy. And she just melted. Because somebody, when she went, because of the pain that she was in and perhaps whatever fears she was harboring, the other person said, that's okay. And she relaxed. They became good friends. They started sharing all kinds of, personal things. And this girl became very nice to everybody else. Okay, hi, good morning, how are you? And so on. So it's an important thing to remember when somebody comes at us with the horns that, well, why are their horns out? Why do they feel the need to defend? It doesn't mean that works with everyone, but how could my friend do that? Well, she's a very, spiritually evolved person. But how did she get there? Through meditation. Through trying to do the right thing. When we meditate, we get to have all these right attitudes for free. We don't have to work necessarily and be like, don't react, don't react, don't react. We just simply don't react because our threshold is just gone way down, or whatever the right direction is, maybe way up. Just our tolerance is way greater. Our hearts feel calm. And so there isn't a wrinkle in there that when somebody touches it, twang, it's just ready to fire out. One thing I like about this Bible reading, it's just kind of sweet and human, is that in the longer version of the Bible reading, when after Jesus criticizes the Pharisees and the disciples say, do you realize how deeply offended they are? And then Peter jumps in and says, explain this parable. It's not what comes out of a man's mouth, but what not goes into it, but what comes out of it. And Jesus says, do you not even understand this? He says, what goes into a man's mouth proceeds to his stomach and eventually leaves the body. But what comes out of his mouth is born from his own mind and his own heart. And that is how and where we are able to judge, or God judges, whether, our cleanliness, our level of cleanliness. And so you can imagine Jesus giving all these parables over and over again, and the disciples going, huh? And him saying, look, get with the program here. I mean, it's just so sweet compared to, you think of, this one chiseled announcement and everyone, it's very human that way. And we go through that with ourselves. And that's what I wanted to end with, is that especially it is not by thinking that we can understand ourselves. How often is it that our own thoughts torment us? Whether we're thinking this is what someone else is thinking, or whether we know someone else isn't even involved and we're just thinking this is what I'm thinking and it's horrible. It's important to remember, as Yogananda said, thoughts are universally, not individually rooted. That thoughts are like radio signals passing through a room, and if our radio receiver is tuned to them, we pick them up. And that's important to remember, because sometimes there are periods when there's disturbance in the world, or there is a lot of negative energy, and we can tune into that and personalize it and just think it's all going on in here. And then you start to find, well, I'm feeling horrible, and this one's feeling horrible, and this one's feeling horrible too. And in my particular line of work, people often kind of knock on my door, literally or metaphorically, and say, hi, I'm feeling horrible. Like, oh, really? And everybody's feeling horrible. What's going on? It can't be just one of us. It has to be something going on. That came up recently. And actually, Bhagavati and Ramesha and Dharmadevi said, let's meditate more. Recently, Swami Kriyananda announced that he would like to create a fellowship of inner communion, which many of you saw in the video last Sunday, where members of this fellowship would dedicate themselves to meditating 3 hours a day. Now, that may sound like an awful lot, and or it may sound like just a little bit more than you're currently doing or what you're already doing. And so the three of them said, let's do that here in LA. Let's lengthen our morning sadhana. Let's get together or figure out how to handle the evening sadhana. So 2 hours in the morning, 1 hour in the evening. And suddenly, the morning meditations were rejuvenated. And we even added a meditation on Sunday now. Thank you, Peter, for leading it. And so that is the way to cut through all of this mental static, whether it's your static or actually not even your static. Sometimes I have to ask myself, is this what I'm feeling, or is this what somebody nearby is feeling? You know, like just try to get clear on our intuition and our intuitive perception. And when we're on the spiritual path a long time, instead of thinking, instead of doubting ourselves, sometimes we doubt our worthiness. We doubt whether these self-doubts take the form of, is God pleased? Is Guru pleased? And recently on a talk that I listened to, Swami Kriyananda said, you have to remember, God is always pleased. I mean, why wouldn't he be pleased? We're trying. We're doing the best we can. We're falling into all these pits that he himself created and said, there's a pit, cover it up, and whoop, there he goes again. I mean, why would he be mad at us for falling into his trap? He put it there for that. But he's saying, each time, climb out, and maybe next time you'll see the little things that I put, and the little arrow that says, step here. And you'll go, oh no, I know your tricks. Why wouldn't God be pleased also with our intention? Lord, I am trying to do better. I am trying to meditate. I am trying to be kind, and I'm struggling. It is important to remember that the mark of a successful life is not to never have failed, to never have struggled, to never have been disappointed. That means we haven't put out enough energy. We've never hit against our own limitations. It is in those repeated failures and attempts to try again that we find true success. And what fuels that repeated effort? It's that longing. The knowing that, you know what, I don't want anything else. I just want freedom.
What is love? Is it only ours? Or does love whisper in the flowers? Surely we, children of this world, could not love by our own stream? Or does joy laugh in every stream? Are the clouds mindless after all? Or is joy all nature's theme? God is dead, so men say. Can't they see all life's display? Not a church binds him as its own. Not a creed makes him fully known. Foolish if we limit him. Every atom is his throne. What is love? Is it only ours? Or does love whisper in the flowers? Surely we, children of this world, could not love by our own powers. What is love? What is love? Is it love we touch